We've got a leaflet, haven't we? That's a very modest £1 on the party's approach to the EU. Also, we've got a bucket will be coming round. You know, obviously rooms cost money and stuff like that. So any contributions that you can make will be very much appreciated. The next speaker, well, hardly needs much of an introduction. Arthur's had a long and principled stand against the EU, the Gentlemen's Club of the EU, and I'd like to introduce the Life President of the National Union of Mine Workers and the head of the Socialist Labour Party, Arthur Scargill.
Comrade Chairman, comrades, friends. I was going to begin my speech tonight by dealing with, first of all, the votes that are taking place in Parliament today. I was going to explain the issues of Brexit, but if you'll forgive me, I'm going to make a short statement about something else. I'm speaking in an area which has been destroyed systematically by, first of all, yes, a Tory government, as Paul has said, but also by the economic, philosophic and economic policies of the European Union, formerly known as the European Common Market. There are no collieries left in this area, which in their heyday produced massive work for people, also wealth for people, and they gave them hope. None of it's left. It's been destroyed. It's almost like a wasteland. Today, you might be surprised to learn that the dirty coal industry in Japan have just announced that they are going to build 45 new coal-fired power stations. 45. The reason, they say, I better put my glasses on for this because it's important. The reason is it's cheaper than any other form of energy. And with the technology we now have, it produces less emissions of any type into the atmosphere. In India, they have just developed a new coal-fired power station. It emits less carbon dioxide than anywhere else because it's using what is known as carbon capture. It's using liquefaction. The significance of those two things is important for all the people in this room, for the simple reason that those technologies were actually developed here in Britain, and in particular in this part of the world. Here we are facing an international development of coal-fired plants after the destruction within Europe, not just within Britain, of the coal-fired power stations and the coal mining industry. Don't forget, in Europe, at the turn of the Second World War in 1945, all the countries within Europe had massive coal industries. All of them have been systematically destroyed. Destroyed before anybody talked about climate change or global warming. By the way, there's a difference. We've had climate change since the beginning of the planet. Global warming, what's the main cause? I'll tell you. The destruction of the rainforests in the Amazon and in other parts of the world. And we ought to be asking ourselves, why is it in this day and age that we are not drawing to the attention of the British public what's taking place. And in America, they've already got a power station fired by coal, working with carbon capture. In America. No, it's not Trump, it was under Obama. And in Canada, they were the first with the Boundary coal-fired power station. It reduced the amount of emissions from 100% to below 10%. And I don't know how many people really realise, I didn't, until I learned a bit more about it, that you need carbon dioxide to enable you to get gas that you want out of the ground, but it can't be got by any other method. So they pump in the waste product known as CO2, carbon dioxide. It's safely stored, but in safely storing it, it forces out 30% of previously unobtainable gas. Now, why is it that we're not doing it here? What's the difference? The answer is, of course, the European Union. But it's not just the European Union. It's the background that matters. And I want to draw tonight to your attention how the European Union came into existence. And it may be that some of my comments may be construed as criticism of many in the labour and trade union movement, and so be it. We've had that all the time since we've had a labour movement. We've had people who've literally sold out on many occasions, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. But what may surprise you is what some of the so-called right-wingers within the movement said about the European Common Market and the European Union. First of all, who was behind the development of the European Union? Who thought of it? Did someone think one morning, oh, we'll have a European Union? Not at all. At the end of the war, we had the Marshall Plan. I don't know how many people know who Marshall was, but General Marshall was the supreme commander of the American forces. He was the one who appointed Eisenhower and appointed McCarthy in the Far East. And Marshall, in his plan in 1951, didn't do it for altruism. He certainly did it for American commercial interests. Firstly, he pressurized two conditions. Europe could have aid, could have assistance, but in return, it had to adopt trading rules that would ease the path for American exports into Europe. Sound familiar? And secondly, it had to have recipient countries in order to form and promote a federal Europe, i.e. the European Union. The Organisation of European Economic Cooperation, OEEC, was created to administer the distribution of the Marshall Plan funding. Jean Monnet, a French politician, and recognised as the founder of the EU, but only the founder of those who originally envisaged the concept, set up the first of the treaties. It was called the Treaty of Paris. And the Treaty of Paris, we were told, was going to protect the coal industries of Europe, including Britain. Well, it certainly did that, did it? We used to have 1,000 collieries in Britain. 1,000. We had over 1 million employees. And on top of that, you can have another 2 million who were engaged in the supply industry for the coal industry or for the distribution from the coal industry. It was slashed dramatically. And tragically, the Labour Party closed more collieries than the Tory party. All on the basis of the argument that it was a sensible thing to do and that nuclear power was cheaper than coal. And we had cheap supplies of oil from the Middle East. Well, if you look back at what happened, the so-called cheap oil went through the roof in 1973-4, and it cost more money in 2 years than the whole of the money it would have cost to keep the coal mining industry in Britain throughout that period, by about £4 billion. That's a lot of money, even in today's terms. But look who opposed it. Very interesting, actually. I often say this, they certainly weren't supporters of mine, some of them, but some of them were. These are the people who criticised the concept of the European Economic Community and warned against its danger. And Hiram Bevan, Hugh Gateskill, Dennis Healy, and Jim Mortimer, who became head of ACAS, and Jack Jones, who became the head of the Transport and General Workers Union, and of course Tony Benn, all who argued vociferously against joining the European Common Market. Now, it's often been said, well, the Socialist Labour Party's policy can't be a long-standing policy because it was only refounded in 1996. Well, I can only speak for myself. I've been opposed to the whole concept of the European Common Market and the Treaty of Paris and the Steel and Coal Community and certainly the European Union for 64 years. I first remember debating with a young Conservative in Barnsley who challenged me on the concept of the European development that was taking place. Did I oppose it? Did I support it? I opposed it then and I oppose it now. And yet you'll notice that the ones who were put on the front pages on television to promote the idea either of supporting or opposing were all a clique that were either Tories or former Tories. Don't run away with the fact that Nigel Farage is somehow a left-winger. He's an ultra-right-winger. He's a racist. This is a man who used to be a member of the Conservative Party. A man who has no tolerance whatsoever for sections within society. Like the mate he's got in America, who probably is the worst we've seen elected in the past 50 years in any election in the United States. These are the people that developed the European Union and the concept that went with it. What does it really mean? Why is it that they're so desperate to retain the European Union? Even after we had, as Paul has said, the largest majority vote in the history of Britain to oppose the European Union membership. Why do they still go on about we've got to retain the single market, or we've got to retain the customs union, and we've got to retain free movement of labour and free movement of capital? The answer is, it's in the interests of capitalism. Let's have a look at the 4 freedoms. Freedoms? Well, first of all, the freedom of movement. What does it mean? It means that any member state of the European Union can have its citizens move from one state to another without let or hindrance. And so you could suddenly see some people from an Eastern European country, up to 1 million at one go, move into a country the size of Ireland. Now Ireland has a population north and south of approximately 4.5 million. What would the effect be of moving 1 million into that country? It would destroy the economic base. And then, of course, you have to examine Great Britain as a whole. I'll tell you a few facts that are important. In 1959, Britain's population was relatively static. In the wake of the Second World War, we had the baby boom really taking place, but it reached a point where it became stable. It went up from about 40 million to about 55 million. In 2000, the population of Britain was 59 million. The birth rate was 1.8. That's a slip. 1.8. I decreased it too much. But anybody with a degree of intelligence knows that to maintain the population, you have to have a birth rate of 2. Otherwise it goes down. But even with the figures that we had in 2000, any budget that you made for the health service, the education system, the care system, social services, all these things that matter, and certainly the National Health Service, which is now facing oblivion, could at least have been funded. The population today is 67 million. Where have they come from? Have they appeared from Mars? Where is it? They certainly haven't come from the West Indies. They certainly haven't come from India or Pakistan or any of the countries that were formerly occupied by Britain within its Commonwealth, within its sphere of influence. Not at all. It's interesting to look at the facts. And these are facts. Before and after the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, the number of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, people in need, coming into Britain, averaged 250,000 a year. The number of people leaving Britain to emigrate to Australia, America, New Zealand, France, Germany, Belgium, all of the other countries, was 350,000 a year. Now my maths have always been my weakest subject. But if 350,000 people were emigrating from Britain, and people who were immigrants or asylum seekers or fleeing from terror were coming in at the rate of 250,000, it meant that we could take certainly another 100,000 and simply maintain the level of the population. But that wasn't the case. And I'll tell you why. Look at the figures in 2014-15. Now the official figures that were put out recorded that the number of migrant workers from within the European Union, that's the countries within the EU, entering Britain were 480,000. That's more than 350,000 going out. And it's certainly more than the number of immigrants and asylum seekers at 250,000. But there's something rather peculiar. I've always known that figures don't lie, but liars can certainly figure. Listen to this one. In the same period that they claim 480,000 people came into Britain under the freedom freedom of movement, they